ladies and gentlemen, that portion of that article spoke to me so well because it made sense of my Martin Luther King quote. It made it make sense. People don't want, because that's ultimately what it's saying. More people don't want to think. And if you are in the absence of being able to think, then take the easy half-baked solution. And in case you hadn't figured it out, if you're a conservative, and especially if you vote Republican, and particularly if you are a black person who votes conservatively Republican, just remember this. They want you to adapt to their half-baked, actually to everybody that votes, especially if you're looking at voting this November. Donald Trump and his administration wants you to indulge in half-baked solutions so you never get answers and we never get progress. And if you want progress, you've got to think about it in those realms. We're going to leave it there. And when we come back, we're going to talk a little bit more about people shaming, which is something I probably just did. Is it ignorance or indignance? And then we're just going to talk about misinformation on social media. So we'll be back after this. Mac and Free, but our names are not important. Welcome back to Mac and Free, but our names are not important. And hey, if it sounds like I had a mouthful and my tongue is tied, man, I'm not tied yet. Free, how about you? You ready to keep going?
I'm ready, baby. Let's go. Keep it moving.
It's that Sunday morning spirit, man. Oh no, I'm not tired. So just keeping that going and keeping that energy up. We want to talk about people shaming. Because, again, we're going to get real different on this show right now. We just talked about right-wing conservatism. If that came off negative and you are a progressive and you shaking your head, you are not going to like us going into this. Because we have this thing that is called people shaming, where people can make a statement out of ignorance or indignance. And most of the time it's very clear. Like, again, case in point, Drew Brees, ignorance, Donald Trump, indignance. There's a difference. Like one's brazen, the other one is just unknowing, not aware. And I have a lot of white people that I love and respect, quite honestly, and they may not fully understand where you're coming from with the point of view because they just basically have a different point of view. There's nothing wrong with that. And when you use the word ignorant, we do have to be careful in making sure that is not a destructive criticism. That's more of a constructive criticism when it's unwillful ignorance. You just don't know. If you riding around in circles because you can't find somewhere, you're ignorant to where that place is located. You're going to look ignorant riding around in circles because you don't know where you are. And that's the way it works. That's the way it looks out. But what our liberal brothers and sisters have a tendency to do is people shame when people don't know anything. And you see it with a lot of white on white. And it creates this barrier where people then become defensive because the criticism is destructive. So I have to ask you, Free, are we preventing progress, both for white people and black people, when we are shaming those for not carrying the same ideologies as ourselves?
Yes, and we feed into divisiveness because there becomes a fine line between disputing facts and shaming someone.
Yes.
And I think now we've gotten to a level where it's popular to call it back with that call out culture, to call you out on stuff. And then it gets into defamation versus debunking. Mm-hmm. And I think that's where the loss in communication and why we have we see now where families, friends have divided over political alliance, which makes no sense to me.
Yeah.
Now, if you spew ignorance, so it be. But I have family members that side with conservative. But in the end, I still love you.
Absolutely.
We don't agree, and we may hash it out. But I want us to keep it centered on what it is, a political, informational debate or disagreement. Doesn't have to be the shaming or calling people out because they don't think like it. That's the beauty of this world, that no two things are alike. If it would be boring if everybody had the same ideology. Now,
yes,
what we do have to guard against are those that bring their ideology and present it in a way that is condescending or not. I guess how would you say, as I say in my vocation, life producing. If it's not giving life to something new that we can hash out and look at, if it's kind of in a negative connotation and condescending towards another group, then we have that friction and that conflict. I ain't gonna say the example because I know you're tired of hearing that name and giving credence, but I think it also deals with how you convey that ideology, because that's where a lot of fault comes into play too. And I'll throw it back to you, Mac, on your thoughts.
But you can use that name in this case, because I think we should only use the name Candace Owens when it is a perfect example, because that's like, again, I'm not people shaming Candace Owens. Candace Owens has she has a large effect or large ability to spew unsubstantiated claims. Like that is the making of her existence. To say some things that are true and to follow it up with a lot of nothing. And that's very different than me having, again, I've worked with people who are like stark conservatives and follow Rush Limbaugh and I've been able to have conversations with those people. Honestly, we talked about this before in the pre-production. I listen to Rush Limbaugh from time to time. Very rarely agree with what he says, but I listen to him anyway. You have to be able to understand the other side of it in order to be able to disagree. If you've never heard anything the other side has said, how in the world can you disagree with them? It's impossible. You don't know what they're talking about. They actually may be able to persuade you their way if you hear what they have to say. Now, that hasn't happened for Rush Limbaugh, but neither has it happened for Umar Johnson. I'm using that not to throw shots at you, Free, because you typically will call me out on that. But I'm using that to say that just because Umar Johnson is black doesn't mean that I don't listen to him. And just because I disagree with him vehemently doesn't mean that I won't listen to what he has to say. I have to get a better understanding of where he comes from and why. And I get it. I just don't agree with what he says most of the time. Same thing with Rush Limbaugh. And they're on two very different ends of the spectrum. But I think it is important to note that when you're shaming, that means you're not listening. And that's really the ultimate point that I wanted to get to. If someone makes a statement, then you immediately go into shame, and you can never get back to forgiveness, then you're not listening. You don't want to listen. You're not trying to understand where those people are coming from. And the reason why I would say that I've completely ignored Candace Owens and using her as that initial example is for the same topic that we're going into now, is because what Candace Owens does is she presents misinformation. And that is dangerous for the ignorant, because if you don't know and someone like Candace Owens has a platform to give you misinformation, now you feel like you do know things that you actually don't know because you're trusting the information from the source from which you're getting it. And that moves us into that and how to be able to recognize misinformation and take responsibility for it, because some people aren't just obtaining bad information, they're presenting bad information as well, and that's not fair to the people who receive it. So, Free, I have to ask you this: who's responsible for misinformation? Is it the informed or the misinformed in this case, or is it the informer? It's a boom boom.
Hey,
Go ahead.
I,
I
hey,
had to
Father,
do
yeah.
it.
No, I think there's responsibility on all factors because I think there's a level of intellectual integrity that all informers should know. Now we know some paint it to a certain degree or for a certain narrative, but there has to be a level of intellectual integrity. But those who are the most uh, that show that integrity or most willing to show that will often challenge you to research what they deliver. And I think being at the informed, we need to go eat whether we agree or not, because a lot of times we go off of the personality that presents it and how we deem that individual or individuals. And sometimes we just like, no, I know I can trust such and such. I know because they usually say some good stuff. But a lot of times what we don't realize is they have a way of putting this information out to feed on emotion. And then we get lost in the lost in emotion. Yeah, I took it way back. But we get lost in emotions, and then we don't logically say, well, let me go back and fact check this. So if I start to spew it out, I know what they're talking about.
Right.
And I don't think we do that because we like the emotion of it and getting new information and new ideology, or if it hits on certain ideologies we have, then we start to run. So I think there's just much of a greater responsibility on the informed to go back and research that. And see, when I hear stuff on certain news channels, and I try to cipher through and be selective of who I truly follow for particular information, but I still use that to lead me back to a research point to say, okay, I can verify that. Right. So I think the responsibility is on all parts, but we have to always hold ourselves accountable too, because you never know what someone's agenda is.
It is on all parts, and here's the reason why. And it goes back to that quote, Martin Luther King, rarely do we find men who are willing to engage in hard, solid thinking. And again, it's up to the informed to... Here's the thing, what everyone is guilty of misinformation, when it comes to misinformation, is this. Excuse me, let me rephrase that. When it comes to misinformation, it is this. This is what everyone needs to be aware of. Confirmation bias. Most people who are giving misinformation is giving it to the people they know are looking for confirmation bias. But they're also aware that confirmation bias is rampant within society, and people want to be around. Again, we got segregation and all other kinds of elements that show the truth to thought of what I'm talking about here, but it's specifically in regards to people want to be around like-minded thinkers and want to be supported by whatever their thoughts are. So you're not going to do the extra work that Free is talking about when you see the information that confirms what's in your thought process already. It already exists. There's no need for you to move any further into the thought. It's already there. They've confirmed it. So we have to be real careful with being able to, number one, recognize and reject our confirmation bias in that moment, and two, be able to go back and fact check, like you're saying. Because I'll give you a perfect example before we go into break here. There was a quote that came out, Donald Trump back in 2016 or 17, can't remember exactly when it was, but it was of him saying that if he switched over to being from being a Democrat to Republican because of how Republicans were stupid, and it would be easier for him to get them to vote for him. And my confirmation bias immediately wanted me to go, see, Republicans, this is why you shouldn't vote for them. But my common sense stepped in and said, hey, that doesn't make sense. There's no way that guy's that dumb. And then I just fact checked it. And then no article ever exists. And it lets you know that people can put whatever information they want to in the means of social media and put it out there for you, but you have to be responsible enough to be able to disseminate it and reject it immediately. And with that said, we'll be right back, and then we'll talk about something a little deeper into the media, which is the who's responsible, the mirror or the media. We'll be back. Mac and Free.